Bright Cutie. Every student matters.
Hello everyone. So let's start our next topic here of chapter number 2, that is nationalism in Indochina. So here students, the next topic is what is modernization. Now before this we talked about religion and anti-colonialism, right? So here what are we seeing? That how the people who were living in these native regions, they were becoming aware and they started questioning the colonial government, right? And it was through religion, it was through education that the French people, they were being now attacked, right? The French colonial government were being attacked. In religion also, we learned about various movements and protests that started taking place. Now let us try to understand that now people were becoming aware, they started fighting for their rights, they also wanted to expel all the French people who were living in the region, right? But how are they going to modernize themselves? Or what was the meaning of modernize for the Vietnamese or the people who were living in those regions? So, did being modern mean giving up the old traditions? So there were several questions that were coming in the mind of Vietnamese or the people around, right? So they were thinking, what does this modernization or being modern mean to them? So was it that they had to give up their old traditions in order to become modern? Or there were some other beliefs as well. So there were some beliefs that Vietnamese traditions had to be strengthened to resist the domination of the West. Right. So here they had to fight for the own culture, for their own culture. Right. So they had to preserve their own culture. Now why they had to preserve their own culture, students? Here we are talking about the term nationalism. And if you remember, when we learnt about nationalism in Europe, we talked about the basic definition. That is the sense of belongingness or the sense of belongingness that comes through shared past. So therefore, all these people, the Vietnamese, they emphasized on their shared culture. Quite important point here. They emphasized on the shared culture. And it was done to resist the domination of the West. So it was only this shared culture that could bring people together, that could insist or that could bring out a sense of belongingness among these people, right? So here they believe that Vietnamese traditions had to be strengthened. Now let us talk about some of the scholars here. So, opposition to the French domination was done by Confucian scholars like Fan Boy Shaw. Now, like I told you, you're going to get some difficult names here, right? So, the second name that you have to remember is Fan Boy Shaw, right? So, he was known as Shaw, C-H-A-U. So, he was against the French domination, right? And he was a Confucian scholar. Now, what do we mean by Confucian scholar? Yes, we learnt about Confucianism. Now, it was a philosophy as well as sometimes referred to as religion that taught to lead a way of life. Talking about the moral values. So, he was specialized in this Confucianism, the idea of Confucianism, right? So, he was a scholar from Negu province, trained in Confucian tradition under his father. So he belonged to this province, that is Negu province, right? And he was also trained in this Confucian tradition under his father. Now in the year 1885, Fan Shao observed the actions of French troops in crushing the scholar gentry resistance to the colonial overlords. Now, do you remember the scholars' revolt? that took place around this year, right? So here we see that Fan Shao, he himself was a Confucian scholar, right? And therefore, he observed all the actions that were taken by the French colonial government. The order that was given to the French troops in crushing the scholar gentry resistance. Now, scholar gentry here means the people belonging to this class, the group of scholars who belong to the royal court, right? So, they were resisting against the colonial overlords, the colonial rich people, the rich families, the thoughts that they were trying to imply or they were trying to force on the people there, right? So, therefore, in the year 1903, he formed a revolutionary society. So, here in Vietnamese, we will call it as Dai Tan Ho. Now, it was formed under Prince Kyong De as head, right? So, he was the head here and this was the society, the revolutionary society as we can call it in English. So, it was formed by Fan Shao. Now, what was his main idea? He wanted to associate the members of Nguyen ruling family sympathetic to the nationalist cause who would serve as the titular head of independence movement, right? So, after the independence movement basically. So, here what are we seeing? That through this revolutionary society, he also wanted to associate the members of which family? This is the ruling family there, right? That is Nguyen, right? Nguyen ruling family and also that was sympathetic to the national cause. And what was his main idea here? That they would become the titular head. So here you will find that in these countries during those periods that we are talking about, there was the government of the monarch, the prince or the king. So this was the ruling dynasty there and he wanted to associate them with the nationalist cause here, right? So this is an image showing the Nguyen family, the ruling dynasty there. Now from the year 1905 to 1908, he lived in Japan. There he met some Chinese reformers as well as the Japanese reformers, right? And also there he met a famous Chinese reformer whose name was Liang Qiacho. And the timeline that you have to remember is 1873 to 1929. He met him in Yokohama in the year 1905. There he wrote his famous book, that is History of the Loss of Vietnam under the advice of Liang Qichao. This is the image of Liang Qichao and you have to remember the name of this famous book here. Written by whom? Written by Fan Shao. He started wandering from place to place. He started meeting new reformers, the Chinese reformers, the Japanese reformers, and influenced by them and under their guidance, he started writing books. And his famous book is the History of the Loss of Vietnam. Okay? And what did he talk about it in this book? So in this book, he talked about two main points here. The first one is loss of sovereignty, right? And the second one is cutting of ties with China. So he here wanted to talk about the impact of French colonial rule in Vietnam, the loss that people had to suffer. The first one was loss of sovereignty, that there is no ruling head, right? The government was under the French people and also how the French culture was being imparted in this region and therefore there was this cutting of ties with China. Why? Because they used to follow the Chinese culture, whether it is in religion or in any other tradition. Again, in 1906, Fan met Fan Chu Trin. The name here should not be confused. That is Fan Hoi Chao and Fan Chu Train. Right. So in Tokyo, that is in Japan, they both met each other. Fan meets fan. But here what we see? We see that they both have this difference of opinions here. Now what was the opinion of Fan Chu Train that differed from that of the opinions that were of Fan Boychow? So in this table, we are going to understand the basic difference of opinions here, right? So Fan Chu Train, he believed in this idea, or he wanted to abolish monarchy in order to create base for strong national sovereignty. Now what are we seeing here? The term monarchy. And here what are we seeing? That Boychow, he favored retaining monarchy as a popular ideological symbol. Quite important point here, students. So here what you have to see, that Trin, he was against monarchy. He wanted a strong national sovereignty, right? So he believed in democratic republic, right? He wanted a strong democratic republic, and also he was against monarchy. What does monarchy mean here? Rule of a single person, be it a king or be it a queen, right? So today many countries we see that we have a rule of single party, rule of a queen, for example in Britain, right, UK. So here we see that the rule of single person or of a monarch, that is a king or a queen, was not in the ideas or in the opinion of Trin a good way to represent a country, right? Therefore he emphasized on democracy, and also Boychow was totally against this whole idea. He wanted to retain monarchy and he saw that as popular ideological symbol. Again, Trin, he wanted to establish a Western democratic structure through peaceful reforms. So basically he wanted to establish through this Western democratic culture or structure, and it was to be done through some peaceful reforms, right? He wanted to drive out the French through armed resistance. Now what are we seeing here? They both have some serious conflicts, right? So one is wanting to have this Western democratic structure, and the other person here, he wants to expel or throw out the French through armed resistance, right? Through by using the means of arms or weapons or so on, right? Force. So this was the differences of opinion here, right? Let us come to the exercise section. In short answer questions, you have a question that says, what was the main difference in the ideas of Fan Boychow and Fan Chu Train? Now here we read about it right now. So he was in favor of retaining what? Monarchy. And he was against monarchy and wanted to establish a democratic republic here, right? Also, he wanted to expel French through armed resistance. Quite important point here. But he wanted Western democratic structure through peaceful reforms. Through peaceful reforms. So these are the differences, right? The two main points that you have to mention in this question, and it is a short answer question, so that would be suffice.